Welcome to Clarkston Lighthouse Guidance. My name's Chandler Fleming. I'm the owner and chief therapist at Clarkston Lighthouse Counseling in Clarkston, Michigan. You don't even know where I'm from.
And I'm Victoria Fleming. I am owner and therapist at Clarkston Lighthouse Counseling as well, and welcome to the show. And today our topic is, can men and women be just friends?
And this is a great topic, and I argue with people about this all the time. So if I start arguing with you as viewers, don't worry. I'll listen, try to get your point of view. But it is a very interesting but very important topic.
It is, for sure.
So,
and I think part of it is we have to define friend. What is it to be a friend? If you were to define friend, what is it to be a friend?
I would differentiate it from acquaintance. So it's somebody that I would share personal information with, that there's a bond, a connectedness, and so I think that those would be some of the things that I would kind of include in that definition of friendship.
And I really appreciate the differentiation from acquaintance. I think people tend to use friend a little liberally, maybe.
Sure.
Like everyone's just my friend. But a friend to me is definitely someone with whom I'm sharing my life, is someone that knows personal things about me, that I feel safe that they know personal things about me. And, it's like I want them to be involved. I want to laugh with them, and if times are hard, cry with them. But it's a go-to person, a friend is. You're my friend.
Right.
But we have more relationship than just friend. We're also friend and spouse. So
Right. Friends with benefits.
Friends with benefits.
But
for sure.
that brings up the concept of friends with benefits. So more and more people are in a sexual relationship and say, well, we're just friends. And does that violate that definition of just friends?
Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of the topic, and I think that's part of the confusion. As you said, some really different opinions out there. As I talk with teenagers, for example, it seems to be more common in their age group because they're together so often to be friends. And so there tends to be a very adamant initial answer of like, yeah, absolutely, men and women can be just friends. And yet when you do start asking some more probing questions, like how do you define friend and what is that exactly, it gets a little more complicated.
So I think for the purpose of our show, friends with benefits is not friends. It's something more than just friendship.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
What's interesting about this topic is it's a fairly new debate. It's probably only within the last couple of 100 years that it's even been an issue.
Probably even less than that. Probably the last 100 years.
Yeah. So because in the past, men tended to hang with men and women tended to hang with women, and there wasn't a lot of crossover between the two. But then that changed.
Right.
That changed with the war.
Definitely changed with World War II, women entering the workplace, women seeking more education and so forth. Kind of our dating culture too, where most people don't recognize how many marriages were arranged marriages, so that concept of that. And then also, realistically, 100 years ago, a teenage man and woman would not be alone together.
That's a very good point.
There would always be, in order to protect the honor and the appearances of the woman's reputation, there would always be a chaperone present.
Yeah, so it really did. I mean, particularly as the men came back from war and there started to be a blending of the workplace where there are men and women, and now suddenly there's more commonality. They're sharing more in common, and there are friendships beginning to develop. And so it's a hotly contested debate, and there are a lot of different opinions about it.
Sure.
So and yet if you do think about Harry Met Sally.
Oh, I love that movie. I think it's great.
I know. In fact, you have a video clip that you love to use fairly often.
Sure.
Yeah, and according to Harry in Harry Met Sally, he has a very strong, his entire philosophy, as he states it to Sally, is, what I am saying is, and this is not a come on in any way, shape, or form, is that men and women cannot be friends because the sex part always gets in the way. What say you?
Well, it worked for Harry because even though she said, hey, we'll just be friends, they became lovers, and they developed this intimate friendship, this sexual relationship. Even though she put him in the friend zone, he knew how to play the friend zone.
Okay, so she at first argued, though.
Right.
We can be friends.
Yeah, and I think, it brings up that topic of dating and interactions. Dating tends to be very dishonest. It's dishonest in the sense that we really don't, it's unflattering, and it's kind of unusual to say, wow, you have all the things on my list. I'd like to date you and marry you in 2.5 years. And if you do these things, I'll drop you like a bad habit. Most people would not get a second date or a first date. So that kind of extends to ourselves. I remember a guy saying to me one time he was dating this girl he really liked, and somebody said, "Oh, are you dating so-and-so?" They said, "Oh, no, we're just friends." But he felt a lot more, but he was kind of being dishonest with himself, dishonest with other people, because it's kind of tacky. If you like somebody too much, that can be a turnoff for them.
Okay, so you're saying that maybe part of the complication between men and women being friends is that there's maybe not the most forthright honesty in dating in the first place.
Sure. And it's funny too, because I had a client one time and we kind of had this conversation, can men and women be friends? And he says, "Oh, I have all sorts of friends that are girls." And I said, "Okay, name 5." So he gives me names, and they're kind of typical names: Kaylee, Kylie, Caitlin. The K's were really big. Emily and Maddie. And okay, rate them all on a scale of 1 to 10. Now so I went through them. Kaylee, she's a 9.5.
What was Maddie?
Maddie was only a 6.8.
Okay.
So I asked him, who was her best friend? And it was the girl that was like a 9.5. So it was very obvious that all the friends he had were very attractive girls, and he was an attractive guy. And I asked him, I said, how do you explain that? And he goes, well, hot girls are just more interesting.
Okay, and that's actually a conversation that does take place between Harry and Sally, because Harry said, the sex card always comes into play if a man finds the woman attractive, and she asked the question. So if a man does not find the woman attractive, and what did he say? Do you remember?
Eventually you want to nail them too, or something like that. So I think that's what he said.
Which is super sad. Okay, so clearly the whole men and women being friends, there are people who would adamantly say, positively men and women can be friends. I have friends, this guy had 5 of them that he listed, and yet the whole hot factor seemed to be a part of the equation,
Sure.
which is interesting. But as we look at it, let's look at what are some of the possible pros. If we say that yes, they can be friends despite the confusion, despite maybe some of the dishonesty that we have in relationships in general, what are some of the possible pros that can come with a man and a woman being friends?
Well, some of them that you had listed is companionship, and I think that oftentimes we're looking for, that comfort, support, that friendship part of a relationship, a greater understanding of the opposite sex. Sometimes you may feel like the person that you're dating is really, really strange, but in a good friend that you have of the opposite sex, they behave that certain way, or they can explain something to you.
Mm-hmm. And I really do think that that's a very helpful part of it. I know being one of 3 girls, when you and I had a daughter and a son, I didn't get the son at all. So I did not have that.
Boys are easy.
I know,
Boys
that's
are
what
easy.
you
Girls
say,
are
but
complicated.
I just didn't have that opposite sex perspective at all. I'd come from a very female dominated household, and so it was confusing to me, some of those male tendencies. Let's take this apart just because we can, and we may not be able to put it back together again, but that's okay. And so I do, there's definitely some perspective from women and from men that, gosh, that opposite sex relationship is super helpful, because I just don't get the opposite sex. I don't get the opposite sex at all. And in that friendship, they can come to each other and say, can you explain why did he do that? Just like I did to you as as the father,
Sure.
like, why did he take my toaster apart? And you were able to explain it,
So you definitely get a better understanding. One of the things that's really important at this point is really to talk about boundaries. Mm-hmm. And in order for an opposite sex friendship to be successful, you got to kind of have things that slow down that relationship.
Clear boundaries.
Create some safety. So, if you're in a committed relationship, how does your opposite sex, your relationship person feel about it? If you're married, how does your spouse feel about this friendship? Are they threatened by it? Mm-hmm. Do you keep secrets from them? Transparency is really, really important. Mm-hmm. Of being transparent and saying, hey, last night I got a call from Sally, and she's having an argument with her boyfriend, and we talked for a while. And what information are you sharing? What information aren't sharing? And then also some of those boundaries can be, where do you go? Mm-hmm. If you hang out with your opposite sex friends after midnight, after drinking, there's a high likelihood you will have sex.
Oh, so I really appreciate what you're saying about the boundaries, because you'd even talked about the fact that if there's not transparency, something about a text. When we were talking about this show beforehand, you're talking about a text that a wife had read that a husband had received from a coworker. Tell about that.
You know, it was funny because they definitely had different boundaries, but I had a client one time that his boss sent him a text saying, "Hey, how are you? How are the kids? Where are you with that project?" And the wife happened to pick up the phone and looked at it and said, "Why is she asking about you? And how does she know you have kids? That's personal stuff. Why is she engaging in this personal conversation?" My assessment of it was, that's kind of a normal friendship, coworker, boss sort of thing, just kind of being polite. But her line was much, much more rigid. And she was offended that that boss would send that kind of a message.
So even looking at the pros of male-female relationships or friendships, not relationships, but friendships, for them to remain healthy, there's got to be a great deal of clarity. There's got to be a lot of honest communication. And that was something that, as we were looking at the studies, came across over and over and over, that it's a little unclear whether or not men and women really can be friends, but in the ones that tended to indicate that they could, it was very clear boundaries, but it was ongoing communication about those boundaries, because at any time there could be a shift where the one in the friendship could want it to be a little bit more, because that's one of the things we're going to get into about some of the cons, is there can be misunderstanding about the other's cues, but they needed to have ongoing clarifying communications about where are we at with this, and are we still good, and what's going on here. And so I think that's super important. Boundaries.
Right, but the other thing is, I have a belief that most people, again, in those relationships, tend to be fundamentally dishonest.
Okay, clarify.
So one of the things I oftentimes talk about in session with people is the naked game. I'll show you mine if you show me yours.
Okay.
And there's a building of trust going back and forth there, where one person will disrobe a little bit, and they won't disrobe more until that other person disrobes themselves. And that's one of the things, part of that dance. So very early in the relationship, do you like me? Maybe a little bit. Well, I like you. Well, maybe I like you a little more. So there's this dance of peeling away the onion and getting to a deeper and deeper layer. And for that reason, initially, I've had couples say, you know what? We're friends, or we're friends with benefits, but if you go out and have sex with other people, I don't care. That's very rarely the truth.
Okay.
And initially people will say, well, I thought it was okay. I understood, but I thought it was just a step. I thought it was a step that, we said that, but we just didn't want to scare the other person off. So you have to be really honest with yourself first, and realistic about what is taking place and where you're progressing in the relationship.
And it's what you said before, it's the fact that there is a dance that happens in dating, so then it's hard to know, is this a dance of just friendship or a dance of dating? But as I said, some of the studies did show there's some very rich male-female friendships out there where, they so appreciate each other's friendship, they so appreciate the companionship that they have, the laughter that they have, the different perspective that the other offers, that, wow, I so don't get the opposite sex. Can you help me out here? So for those who are able to navigate it well, for those of you who are watching this show and saying, are you kidding? I have a dozen, opposite sex friends, and they're super important to me. Way to go. You're treading some treacherous waters possibly, but if you're navigating it well, way to go. But as we look at this, there are cons.
Yes.
So as we look at some of those cons, what are we looking at?
Well, really misunderstanding each other's cues, and again, that's part of that dishonesty. But just because somebody comes up and gives you a big hug doesn't necessarily mean that they like you in a romantic way, or that they want to be hugged back. So those rules are somewhat subtle, and not really knowing where things are going can really set somebody up for the potential of pain. That, hey, I thought that we were more than just friends, or I thought that we were close friends. And so that leads to some hurt feelings.
It was really interesting. Some of the studies, it was the cue part that was a fundamental problem.
Sure.
You know, women can tend to be touchy and may touch the guy's arm, and she just means it's like, oh, that was so funny, grabs the guy's arm and means nothing by it. And when was interviewed, meant nothing by it. And yet when the guy was interviewed, he interpreted it as, oh, she wanted to touch my arm, and that there was an underlying sexual interest.
Sure.
You know, in fact, there was one study done where 88 different friend couples, you know, male-female friend couples were interviewed, and they were very careful to make sure that they were separated, that all the confidentiality was in place. And as they interviewed these men and women, the men had a tendency to, as we talked about, misread the women's cues and really think that there were times that their female friend was flirting with them, indicating that they might be interested in more than just friends, whereas the women who were friends with that guy came in and said, oh no, he's my best bud and it's all good, and you know, didn't have any understanding that the male may be thinking, gosh, this could shift into something more than, you know, just friends.
Yeah, and one of the things I would be interested in is really to study that second part of that study and see where were they in 3 years. And see how many of these people that identified as just friends were in a sexual relationship or a committed relationship.
And the other one, you know, another potential con is that they weigh the different cost assessments very differently. And so you've brought up the friends with benefits. And so as men and women were interviewed, for the guy very often, at least in these studies, and there may be some dishonesty within them, but for the guys anyway, there tended to be a, hey, we're friends with benefits. Cool. And the woman may have started that way, thinking this is good, this is safe, there's no risk involved. But you and I have talked about the hormonal connection that a woman can have. And so very often for the woman, what may have started as, hey, cool, becomes a more question, well, I'm not sure how I'm feeling about this. You know, what can you add about that hormonal?
Well, you know, it's interesting. Women tend to have more hormones and more hormone receptors, and the two hormones, prolactin and oxytocin. So the hormone that causes a woman to produce milk for her baby and causes her to bond with her baby is the same hormone that is produced in sexual contact. So a man and woman go out, they have intercourse. It can be just sex for him. For her, she has to fight her biology because there's a lot of imprinting that takes place and a lot of hormonal action that causes a bonding to take place and say, this is somebody that I want to be with. There's a belonging need. We go together.
Which is why you and I, again, as we're looking at this from can men and women be just friends, we would qualify that it is a non-sexual relationship.
Sure.
You know, that is not a friends with benefits, because there is just a lot of risk that's involved with that.
Yeah.
You know, it enters a whole different arena.
Yeah, and it's interesting, there's a book called Not Just Friends, which really relied on the airport study, which said that 85% of people who end up having extramarital affairs start off as a friendship, and that they believe that sex is not an option, that it's just a good, safe friendship, in that over time that friendship gets more and more deep and then it becomes sexualized. Nobody at the beginning of that friendship ever thought that it was going to lead to sex. But in 85% of affairs, we believe, are that way.
And we actually did talk to an individual who I think wisely clarified, if I am friends with a woman, then my wife is involved. And if that woman is married, then her husband is involved. And I know you and I had a conversation with some of our friends, and you know, you had said men and women, you tend to be, men and women cannot be friends. And you had mentioned that to our one male friend, and he said, well, I'm friends with your wife, and you qualified it. You said you're friends with my wife in context to us as couples.
Right,
you know?
so there's that boundary of couples, but also it's that definition of a friend. And you know, what information will we share and what information would you share privately? So I look at touch, communication, and money. And normally it crosses the line if there's too much of any of those three. If there's over communication based upon the volume of information and the emotional intensity, but also touch and money too.
You know, if I start calling my male friend with news first, before I tell you,
Sure.
then there's a boundary issue. And I need to ask myself, have I crossed? We're no longer just friends, we've become something more. And
Sure.
that is definitely one of the cons. Is it seemed to be that men and women who are single and have not engaged in a more permanent relationship with someone are more successful, at least, in navigating those waters, or there's less risk involved than individuals who are married or have a significant other with, in their life and now are trying to have, because it is very difficult to, it's a slippery slope. None of us enter into a friendship thinking, and this is going to lead to an affair. I'm going to sabotage my current relationship. It's just gradually there's a shift made. And I think that's a risk. That is
Sure.
a potential con for sure about male-female friendships.
And the last con is, I'm sure it's never happened to any of you out there, but you get friend zoned. And basically friend zoned is that somebody puts the brakes on the relationship and says, you know what, I just don't think of you in that way. I do encourage a lot of my clients who are friend zoned to recognize that it can be a temporary state, that you need to learn how to play the friend zone in order to get into the romantic zone. In that a lot of relationships and a lot of people I know who were friend zoned are now married today. I'm one of them. So, so there's definitely a way to play the friend zone, but there can be those feelings of disappointment and confusion over, hey, what's going on here? I thought we were more than that. And lots of feelings of hurt and disappointment.
And it can be so awkward. I mean, I was speaking to someone just yesterday who was talking about, for her, that, it's so aggravating when the guy wants to shift it to more, and yet she'd also experienced how aggravating it is for her to want to and to know that's not allowed.
Yep. I knew a lady one time who, after she got married, in the year afterwards, she got letters from a few guys saying, hey, I thought we were more serious than what we were. Even though she was engaged for 6 or 8 months and got married. So there's definitely some pain associated with being friend zoned in that breakdown of communication of what's really going on in the relationship.
And like we said, it's that awkward dance, because at any time it can shift. So if you are in a relationship, a meaningful relationship with someone, if you have a friendship with someone the opposite sex, then just be aware that there are risks involved and that there needs to be ongoing communication, ongoing clarification of where we are, because one just never knows when they're going to take that shift where it's going to be, I grab your arm and I actually did mean it. Hey, I'm flirting with you now. Did you get that? Did you get that?
You're always flirting with me, so it's hard to tell.
So this is a topic that's likely going to be debated for years to come, but it is one that we need to be aware of. We need to be mindful as we are mingling with each other in the workplace and in colleges and in other settings, that there needs to be an awareness.
Yeah. And some of you need to recognize over time you're irresistible. So you think you can just maintain friends, but sooner or later they're going to fall hard for you. So remember that. If you have any other questions or questions for the program, we'd love to entertain them. Please send them to our website or our Facebook page. Thank you so much for watching the show, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Hope to see you again. Thank you.
The views expressed in this show are for general educational purposes only and do not constitute professional advice on any subject matter, nor do they necessarily reflect the views or opinions of its guests or of Independence Television. If mental health assistance is needed, please seek professional licensed treatment.